He watched me struggle across the ice with 2 sagging grocery bags and turned away. "Do it yourself, old woman," his girlfriend laughed from the car. That was the day something inside me split. I co-signed his mortgage, covered his debts, saved him from drowning, more than once. But when the bank letters came addressed to both our names, I made a decision. If he wouldn't carry my groceries, I'd carry his home straight to the courthouse steps. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The wind came in sideways, sharp and slicing, the kind of Missouri cold that crept through seams and found your joints. Ruth Callahan tightened the scarf at her neck and shuffled forward across the cracked asphalt of the supermarket parking lot, 2 overstuffed paper bags clutched to her chest like newborn twins. One bag's bottom sagged ominously, a frozen chicken shifted. Her fingers burned with the weight. She didn't see Brian at first. Her eyes were on the slush, on the treacherous black ice glazed between the faded parking lines. A single misstep could mean a broken hip, a hospital bill, maybe worse. A car door slammed. Loud laughter rang out, jarring in the stillness. Ruth turned her head, breath catching in her throat. There he was. Brian, her son. He stood in the next row over, loading a half-dozen cases of beer into the back of his glossy black SUV, a vehicle too large for any reasonable purpose, the kind that bragged about itself. His posture was relaxed, arrogant. He was wearing that leather bomber jacket she hated, too young for him, too slick, like he thought he was still 20 and bulletproof. She hesitated, then called out, "Brian?" His head turned slowly. He blinked once like he hadn't quite placed her. Then recognition flickered, and immediately, disdain. "Mom." His voice was flat, clipped. He turned back to his beer. "I could use a hand," Ruth said. Her voice was steady, not pleading. The bags dug deeper into her forearms. "These are heavy." A sharp click of laughter erupted from the passenger seat. Tiffany. She leaned out the window, lips curled in mockery. "Do it yourself, old woman." Brian smirked, tossing the last case of beer in with a casual shrug. "Yeah, thought you were tough." Ruth's mouth tightened. She looked at him for a moment longer, hoping, foolishly, for some glimmer of decency. Nothing. His eyes slid right past her, already done. He shut the trunk with a smooth, indifferent thud. She adjusted her grip on the bags, realigning their weight. The cold burned up her arms now. She could feel her heartbeat behind her eyes. "Take care, Brian," she said quietly. He didn't answer. She turned back toward her car. The walk to her Corolla felt twice as long now. Each step was deliberate, cautious. Her knuckles whitened. One of the bags was starting to tear, and she prayed it would hold until she reached the back seat. Behind her, the SUV's engine growled to life. Tires squealed against slush, too fast for the lot. Ruth didn't look back. By the time she reached her car, the tears had started, sharp, involuntary things that stung more than soothed. She blinked them away. She wouldn't drop these bags. Not even now. Later that afternoon, back in her bungalow, the warmth of the radiator took the edge off the ache in her arms, but not the hollow lodged behind her ribs. She set the groceries on the counter, peeled off her coat, and stood still for a moment in her narrow kitchen, trying to shake off what had settled in her chest. The doorbell rang. She frowned, dried her hands, and opened it to find Gloria Mitchell standing on the porch with a plastic tub of homemade chili and a brow knitted in concern. "Good Lord, Ruth, you look like someone punched the moon out of you." Ruth managed a weak smile. "Just tired, that's all." "Liar," Gloria said flatly, stepping inside without waiting. She set the chili on the table, turned and studied Ruth's face like a detective eyeing a clue. "What happened?" Ruth hesitated. Her throat worked around the words. "I saw Brian at the store." Gloria's eyes narrowed. "And?" "He told me to carry my own damn bags." Ruth's voice cracked just slightly. "Called me an old woman." For a second, neither spoke. Then Gloria reached across the table, her grip fierce and full of fire. "You are not old. You are seasoned. And you sure as hell are not disposable." Ruth opened her mouth to reply, but the phone rang, piercing and shrill. She glanced at the caller ID. Her stomach turned. Brian. She didn't pick up. The house was quiet enough to hear the ticking of the kitchen clock, sharp and measured like a countdown. Ruth stood at the edge of the living room, arms folded, staring at the hallway that led to the back bedroom, the one she used as an office, though these days it was mostly where paperwork went to die. She hadn't set foot in there since last tax season. Gloria had left an hour ago, after insisting Ruth eat at least half a bowl of chili. Now, the aftertaste of crushed tomato and cumin lingered at the back of her throat, but it was something else that stirred her stomach. That voice. "Do it yourself, old woman." The words hadn't just stung, they had opened something. A slow, pressurized release of grief that had been building for years. The boy she had raised was gone. In his place stood a man with a six-figure mortgage and a mouth full of contempt. She turned down the hall and stepped into the office. Dust lingered in the slats of the blinds, softening the edges of the light that fell across a metal filing cabinet in the corner. Beige, rusted at the bottom, it looked like it had been dragged through every stage of her life. She crouched slowly, knees stiff, and opened the bottom drawer. Tax returns, bank statements, birth certificates. Then her hand paused on a thick folder marked in blue ink, BRIANHOMELOAN. She pulled it free and sat at the desk. The folder felt heavier than she remembered. Inside, the loan agreement from 2017, when he and Tiffany had finally found the dream house. He hadn't qualified for the full amount on his own, credit too thin, income too patchy. She'd signed on the dotted line because he'd called her Mom in that sweet sing-song way he used to when he was little. Because he'd said, "It's just paperwork. It's nothing. It's just to help us qualify." Because she'd believed, back then, that he wouldn't drown with her name tied around his ankle. Now a stack of letters spilled out, statements, warnings, the red-inked kind that didn't waste time with pleasantries. Final notice. Payment overdue. Notice of default pending. She read through them once, slowly, then again faster, piecing together the pattern. 6 months behind, fees accumulating, legal threats beginning to stack, and every one of them bore her name, small and tidy, beneath his. Ruth reached for the rotary phone on the desk. Her fingers trembled slightly as she dialed. "Martin Heller's office," said a young voice on the other end. "How may I direct your call?" "It's Ruth Callahan," she said, steady. "I need to speak to Martin. It's urgent." A few moments of hold music. Then, "Ruth?" The warm, gravel-throated voice of her old attorney. "Been too long. What's going on?" She explained in measured detail. No embellishments, no emotion. Just facts. When she finished, Martin was quiet for a beat too long. "You said you co-signed?" he finally asked. "I did." "Then you have leverage," he said. "If Brian's defaulting, you could initiate foreclosure proceedings yourself, protect your own credit, your assets. It's not pretty, but it's legal." Ruth stared at the mortgage documents spread across her desk like a crime scene. "You'd help me with that?" she asked. "I'd insist on it," Martin said. "I'll draw up the basics and we'll talk this week. You're not the first mother I've seen dragged under." She hung up without thanking him because she knew he'd understand. For a long moment, she sat still. The radiator clicked in the hallway. Outside, a siren wailed somewhere down Grand Avenue. And inside her chest, something shifted. Not rage, not grief, something colder, cleaner. Resolve. She picked up the topmost envelope again, tracing the line where Brian's signature sat above hers. His penmanship had always been rushed, like he couldn't wait to be done with whatever promise he was making. She, on the other hand, read every word. Ruth stood, gathered the papers, and slipped them back into the folder. She didn't slam the drawer shut. She closed it like a ledger finished. Then she walked down the hall toward the kitchen, the folder tucked under her arm. On the counter, her phone buzzed with a new message. Brian again. This time, "You've always had my back. Just need a little help this month, please." Ruth didn't reply. Instead, she picked up a pen and opened a fresh legal pad. A plan was forming. The scent of turned soil and fresh-cut lavender lingered in the air as Ruth knelt beside the raised beds at the South City Community Garden. Her gloved hands moved with slow precision, rooting out weeds that had crept in through the early spring thaw. The task gave her rhythm. Rhythm gave her quiet. Gloria knelt beside her, yanking a dandelion from the corner of her plot with the energy of someone preparing for war. "You've been digging holes like you're trying to bury something," Gloria said, peering sideways through her oversized sunglasses. Ruth sat back on her heels, brushing dirt from her wrists. "Maybe I am." Gloria paused, lowered her trowel. "Start talking." Ruth inhaled through her nose, slow and steady, then told her everything, every bruise of it. The grocery store, the folder, the red ink, the call to Martin. Her voice didn't tremble this time. She didn't look away. And Gloria didn't interrupt once. When Ruth finished, Gloria sat in silence for a beat, then, softly but firmly, "Time to prune the dead branches." Ruth let out a quiet breath. "That's what I thought." They didn't say much after that. The garden, like grief, demanded its own space. But as they packed up their tools, Gloria's hand closed over Ruth's, strong, sure. "Whatever comes next, you're not doing it alone." Back home, Ruth stood at her kitchen table, documents spread in tidy rows like seedlings waiting to be planted. She had opened every envelope, read every clause. Highlighters marked dates. Sticky notes tabbed interest spikes. Each page was either a wound or a weapon. She labeled 3 folders, primary loan documents. Correspondence, legal next steps. Each one clicked shut with finality. From the windowsill, her phone buzzed. She almost didn't check it, but the screen lit up with a photo, a shiny white boat bobbing on a lake, backlit by a golden sunset. The caption read, "Finally made the plunge. Call her Tiff's reward. Sent from Brian." Ruth stared at the image for a long, silent moment. The vessel gleamed like something bought on borrowed charm. Tiffany stood at the helm in a white halter dress, holding a glass of champagne like she'd never dropped anything in her life. Ruth didn't sigh, didn't curse, didn't cry. She simply turned the phone face down and slid it off the table. Then she opened her notebook again. On the top of the legal pad, beneath her bullet points and hand-drawn timelines, she wrote one line in sharp block letters. "Weeds don't apologize. You pull them anyway." She underlined it twice. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the chimney stacks of South City and shadows crept long across the floor, Ruth made a fresh pot of tea and set her folders in a neat stack by the door. Tomorrow, she'd meet with Martin again. She'd sign whatever needed signing. She'd put her name to a different kind of paper, one that didn't just keep Brian afloat, but pulled him under. Her fingers brushed over the folders like pages in a book she was finally ready to read aloud. Then the phone buzzed again. Another message from Brian. This time, "You'll always be there for me. You always are." She didn't answer. She opened her drawer and pulled out a single item she hadn't touched in years, her old red ledger from her bookkeeper days. Columns crisp, every number tidy. On the first clean page, she wrote, "Cost of groceries, $94.12. Cost of betrayal, still calculating." She capped the pen, shut the ledger. Tomorrow, she would begin to collect. Downtown St. Louis pulsed with the low hum of weekday business, buses coughing exhaust, phones ringing through office windows, voices bouncing off concrete and glass. Ruth stood outside the law office of Martin Heller, attorney at law, adjusting her scarf with the deliberate calm of someone preparing for surgery. The folder under her arm felt lighter than it had the night before, not because its contents had changed, but because she had. Inside, the office was just as she remembered. Modest, no frills, every surface stacked with documents that probably hadn't moved in months. The receptionist waved her through. No forms, no small talk, just a nod that said, "He's waiting." Martin stood when she entered his office, the way a man did for someone he respected. His hair was thinner now, mostly gray, and his suspenders had lost their elasticity, but his eyes were sharp, kind eyes, familiar in a way that steadied her. "Morning, Ruth," he said. "Coffee?" "I brought my own," she replied, holding up her travel mug. "Made it how I like it." He smiled and gestured toward the chair across from his desk. "Let's get to it." The papers were already laid out. neatly, deliberately, each tabbed with color-coded stickers and attached notes in Martin's tight, lawyerly scrawl. He walked her through every step. The notice of default she'd be filing, the public notice period, the transfer of creditor authority, the schedule for auction, if it came to that. Missouri law gave her a clean, direct path. Martin made sure she understood every bend in it. "Once we initiate," he said, tapping the final page, "they'll receive formal notice. It won't feel real until then. People rarely believe the hammer's coming until they hear the wind-up." Ruth said nothing. Her gaze held steady on the signature line. Martin slid a fountain pen toward her. She picked it up. For a moment her fingers hovered, and then she signed. Not like someone uncertain, like someone making a promise to herself. When the ink dried, Martin let out a low whistle. "I've helped people walk away from a lot of wrecks," he said. "You're the first to walk into one on purpose." "I'm not walking into it," she replied. "I'm walking through it." Martin nodded. "I'll file this today. You'll get a confirmation packet within the week." She exhaled. The breath came out deep, clear. Outside, the sun was high over the arch, catching the windows of the courthouse like flares. Later that afternoon, Ruth sat at Gloria's kitchen table, a fresh slice of apple pie steaming under a scoop of vanilla ice cream. The crust was perfect, flaky and golden, and the cinnamon hit first, warm and sharp. Gloria poured coffee into mismatched mugs. "You look like you just walked out of a confessional." "I did," Ruth said. "Only instead of sins, I left signatures." Gloria grinned and raised her mug. "To pruning season." Ruth tapped hers against it. "To clean ground." They ate mostly in silence. The quiet between them was never uncomfortable. It was the quiet of women who knew what it meant to endure without applause. Ruth glanced at her phone once. No new messages, no apologies, no explanations. She didn't expect them anymore. That night, back in her bungalow, Ruth sorted the last of her copies into a fireproof box she kept in the bedroom closet. Her home smelled faintly of lemons and cedar. The space was small, yes, but it was hers, paid off, steady. She sat down at the kitchen table, opened her red ledger again, and added a new line. "Legal fees. $250 retainer. Feeling of air returning to my lungs. Priceless." The sound of the pen scratching across the page was the only sound in the room. She capped it and looked out the window. Wind rustled the hedges. A street lamp flickered on. Somewhere down the block, someone's wind chimes trembled. The stillness settled like truth. And then, her phone buzzed. One new text, from Tiffany. It read, "Brian says you're trying to ruin us. Is that true? I need to know what kind of woman you really are." Ruth stared at the screen, pulse calm. Then she opened a blank text window, typed 5 words, paused, and hit delete. She would let the paperwork speak. It was a Tuesday, quiet, gray, with the scent of rain clinging to the gutters when they came. Ruth had just finished folding the last of her dish towels, the red checkered ones her mother used to keep in her own kitchen. She liked how the corners lined up when folded just right. Clean corners gave her peace. The knock came loud and entitled, not a doorbell, a fist. Ruth opened the door to find Tiffany already halfway up the steps in a camel trench coat that cost more than Ruth's monthly electric bill. Brian followed a step behind, his mouth tight and his eyes shifting the way they did when he thought someone else held the cards. "Well, isn't this cozy?" Tiffany said, sweeping past Ruth without waiting for an invitation. "Still have that mustard yellow paint on the walls. Vintage, I suppose." Ruth closed the door softly behind them. "It's warm in the winter." Brian stood awkwardly just inside the threshold, hands buried in his jacket pockets. "Thought we'd drop in. Been a minute." Ruth gave him a polite nod. "You caught me between errands." They sat themselves on her floral sofa like royalty, slumming it for the day. Tiffany crossed her legs with flair. Brian leaned forward, elbows on knees, a strained smile on his face. "So," he said, "how have you been feeling lately?" "I'm 74, Ruth said, "so every day I wake up is a victory." Tiffany laughed like it was a joke. Brian didn't. He cleared his throat. "It's just, we've been talking, Tiff and me, about long-term stuff, end-of-life planning, that kind of thing, For everyone's peace of mind. Ruth's spine straightened half an inch. You mean my end of life? Brian gave a weak chuckle. It's just, your house is paid off. No debt, insurance policies, that sort of thing. We just want to make sure your affairs are in order. That there's security. Ruth's eyes went to the mantel. The clock there had been a wedding gift, 49 years ago. It ticked now, slow and unimpressed. My affairs, she said, are mine. Brian opened his mouth to respond, but the front door creaked open again. Hope I'm not interrupting, Gloria called out, her voice cheerful with just the right edge. She stepped into the room, holding a mason jar of wildflowers, her gardening gloves still tucked in her waistband like a holster. Oh, Tiffany said, deflating. It's you. Gloria beamed. Me, yes. Who were you expecting? Santa Claus. She handed the flowers to Ruth, then took a seat in the armchair like she owned the place. Brian blinked, clearly recalibrating. We were just catching up with Mom, seeing how she's doing. Mm-hmm, Gloria said, pulling out a peppermint from her pocket and popping it into her mouth, because nothing says loving son like surprise visits and death talk. Tiffany's jaw twitched. The silence hung heavy. Ruth stood slowly, walked to the kitchen, and returned with 4 mismatched glasses of water. She handed one to Gloria first. Brian shifted, rubbed his palms together, then leaned forward again. Look, Mom, we might need a little help. Temporary. You know how these things go. The market dipped, interest rates, property taxes, and if it comes down to it, we might just stop paying the mortgage for a bit. Let it float. Gloria's head snapped toward him. Ruth kept her voice level. Float? Brian gave a tight shrug. You'll pick it up anyway. You always do. The silence that followed was not quiet. It was suffocating. Tiffany reached for her water but didn't drink it. Gloria leaned forward like she was about to lunge. Ruth set her glass down gently, hands folded in her lap. You assume, Ruth said softly, that I still consider you worth rescuing. Brian blinked. That's not what You assume, she continued, her tone even and cold as lake ice, that I'll save you from your own choices. Again. Mom dash. I'm not your fallback, Ruth said. Not anymore. Tiffany stood suddenly. This place reeks of mothballs and martyrdom. Let's go. Brian followed, but not before looking at Ruth one last time, as if searching for something that had long since vanished. They left without saying goodbye. Ruth stood at the window and watched them cross her lawn, Tiffany's heels stabbing into the soil like they resented having to touch it. Behind her, Gloria let out a long breath. Well, she said, that was civil. Ruth turned from the glass. Her voice was steady, but her jaw was tight. Martin files the full notice tomorrow. The voicemail came in just after sunrise. Ruth had just finished steeping her tea, Earl Grey with a splash of honey, when the phone buzzed and blinked on the counter. The caller ID read Brian. Again. She didn't pick up. She watched the steam curl up from her mug, the air thick with bergamot and quiet. The phone stilled, then, a second later, buzzed once more. New voicemail. She didn't listen right away. She didn't want to hear that voice. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Instead, she moved around her bungalow, watering the African violets in the windowsill, dusting the top of the TV with a damp cloth, adjusting the curtains so the morning light spilled clean across the floor. Only after she had refolded the dish towels did she finally tap play. Hey, Mom, listen, His voice cracked, raw, unfamiliar. I messed up. I know I did. The boat, the house, all of it. I shouldn't have assumed. But we're in deep now. They're talking about court. She's not doing great. Neither am I. Pause. Please. Just talk to me. Just call me back. Please, Mom. The message ended with the sound of his breath catching, like a man who'd finally realized he was standing on a floor that wasn't there. Ruth stood still, hand hovering above the phone. Then she deleted the voicemail. No hesitation, no second listen. Later that morning, Gloria pulled up in her scratched-up green Subaru, a basket of hand lotions and peanut brittle tossed into the passenger seat. We're not sulking today, she said as Ruth stepped in. We're going to see something that blooms without permission. They drove in silence to the Missouri Botanical Garden, the sky a pale blue smear overhead. Inside the climatron, the air was thick with orchids and damp earth, heavy with the scent of blooming citrus. Ruth moved slowly through the domes, letting her fingertips drift near ferns and hibiscus without touching. The colors were outrageous. Life had no business being that loud in the face of everything else, and yet, it was. At the koi pond, Gloria nudged her shoulder. "He called, didn't he?" Ruth didn't answer right away. A golden fish twisted through the water beneath them. "He begged," she said finally, "but not for forgiveness, just for help." Gloria nodded. "That sounds about right." They lingered for a while longer beneath the canopy, surrounded by breath and blossom. By mid-afternoon, Ruth was home again, the kettle hissing gently on the stove. She poured herself a second cup of tea and carried it into the living room, setting it beside her ledger. The foreclosure folder remained closed. She didn't need to reopen it. The phone rang again. This time it was Martin. She answered. "Good timing," he said. "Just got back from the clerk's office. The filing's official now. Foreclosure is in motion." Ruth nodded, though he couldn't see her. "No objections so far," Martin continued. "No payments made, which tells me he doesn't think you'll go through with it." "Oh," Ruth said, her voice like still water. "He will." Martin paused. "We'll talk next week. Auction date should come through by then." She hung up and took a long sip of tea. It didn't burn this time. It was perfect. That evening, she checked her email and saw the notification. Tiffany Callahan has posted a new update. Ruth's thumb hovered over the screen. The post read, "Some people hoard money and abandon family. Some people forget where they came from. It's always the ones who preach loyalty the loudest who vanish first, but karma always remembers." Ruth didn't react, not out loud. She simply clicked save, took a screenshot, and emailed it to herself with the subject line, "Character reference." Outside, a light rain began to fall. The kind that tapped gently against the windows, as if asking permission to come in. Ruth curled up in her chair, wrapped herself in the hand-knit shawl she'd made during the first winter after her husband died, and opened her ledger again. She added 2 new lines. Emotional blackmail attempt, 1. Digital tantrum, 1. Her pen didn't hesitate. She capped it and looked out at the rain, at her small, silent garden beyond the glass. And for the first time in days, she smiled. The auction date arrived not with thunder, but with an envelope. Ruth found it on her porch one morning, tucked neatly beneath the South City Gazette, the legal printout folded and paperclipped to a small note from Martin's assistant. Just a short sentence. "It's scheduled. You're officially on the docket." Ruth brought it inside with her groceries and laid it on the table like a final jigsaw piece. She didn't rush to open it. First, she put the eggs away, lined the apples in the fruit bowl, wiped down the counter. Only when the kitchen was spotless did she reach for her calendar. She flipped past April and stopped at the middle of May. A pale yellow square, Thursday, sat open. With a red pen, she wrote, 10 a.m. Foreclosure auction, Chesterfield property. Then, in smaller script just beneath it, wear something light, something steady. The next message came that evening. Brian, Tiff's birthday dinner is Friday. We made a reservation at that bistro you love. We want you there, Mom. Please. Ruth stared at the text for a long while. It was calm, clean, no exclamation points, no pressure. That was what made it feel dangerous, like a handshake before a trap. She typed her reply deliberately. "Thank you for the invite. I won't be able to attend. I wish her well." Simple. Final. No room to wedge in guilt. She left the phone on the kitchen counter, screen face up. The silence that followed was loud in its own way. The next morning, Gloria showed up at Ruth's back door with a tin of still warm cookies, snickerdoodles dusted with cinnamon and a little salt, the kind that bit back. "I figured this deserved something sweet," she said, stepping inside like she always did, uninvited and welcome. Ruth poured 2 mugs of coffee and set the tin between them. "The date's set," she said. Gloria raised her eyebrows. "And the world didn't split open?" "Not yet." They sat quietly, chewing and sipping, the sun warming the floor between them. Ruth didn't say it out loud, but there was something ceremonial in the cookies, a victory, small and warm. I think you're the first person in history, Gloria said, to celebrate a foreclosure with baked goods. I'm celebrating clarity, Ruth replied. The math of it. Gloria reached for another cookie. That's cold. No, Ruth said. It's honest. That afternoon, a padded envelope arrived by courier. She opened it at the kitchen table, using her favorite letter opener, steel, curved like a small scythe, the kind of tool meant for clean cuts. Inside were the final documents from Martin, notices of sale, the scheduled courthouse listing, the certified mail receipts. Each page was a statement of intent. Ruth read every word. She initialed here, signed there, dated where required. When she reached the last sheet, she paused. Her name, Ruth Evelyn Callahan, was printed in bold at the top, directly above Brian's, his in black, hers in red. The same names that had appeared together on permission slips, tax returns, birthday cards. Now, here they were, one severing the other. She took a breath and signed. That evening, as the last light faded over South City, Ruth sat by her window, her red ledger open once more. She added 2 new lines: legal notice received, checkmark. Birthday party declined, checkmark. Then, just beneath them, she wrote, auction date, circled, not celebrated, not feared. She stared at that final sentence, then underlined it once. Her phone buzzed. Brian. Understood, but you'll regret missing this. She didn't respond, but she did whisper something into the room just to hear the truth of it aloud. I don't regret what I didn't attend. I regret what I allowed for too long. The wind shifted, pushing against the window pane like something had turned. The screen door slammed against the frame with a hollow bang. Ruth turned just in time to see Brian barreling into her bungalow, a crumpled envelope in one hand, fury dragging behind him like a thundercloud. You actually did it? He barked, slapping the notice against her kitchen table. What the hell, Mom? Ruth set down her cup of tea, took her time adjusting the saucer beneath it. You let yourself in without knocking. He stepped closer, nostrils flared. You filed. You didn't warn me. You didn't even talk to me first. I gave you a lifetime of warnings, she said quietly. The envelope slid off the table, landing on the floor beside his shoe. He didn't pick it up. Behind him, the door creaked open again. Tiffany entered like she was walking into a courtroom, chin lifted, lips pressed so tight they were almost white. You've lost your damn mind, she said. Ruth looked between them and said nothing. Brian's voice cracked. This isn't some joke, Mom. We're about to lose everything. The house, the boat, the equity. You mean the things you bought before paying what was due? Ruth interrupted, her voice still calm. You're our mother, he said, pointing a trembling finger. You're supposed to help, not sabotage us. I did help, she replied. I co-signed. I gave you credit you hadn't earned and time you didn't deserve. And you wasted both. Tiffany scoffed. You'll regret this when you're alone in a hospital bed one day, with no one left to care if you live or die. Ruth's mouth twitched. If that happens, I'll die with my name clean. Brian ran a hand through his hair, pacing like a man trying to outrun gravity. Why now? Why this hill to die on? Because, Ruth said, rising slowly from her chair, you signed your own ruin the day you decided I was your insurance policy, not your parent. Tiffany crossed her arms. You think this makes you some kind of hero? I think it makes me free. The room vibrated with the tension of 3 people who had once shared Christmas dinners, who had once posed for photos in front of trees and cakes and school graduations, and who now could barely share oxygen. Then, a new voice cut through it like garden shears slicing twine. Funny thing about parasites, Gloria said, stepping in through the side door, cheeks flushed from the walkover. They always scream when the host cuts them loose. She strode to Ruth's side without hesitation and stood there, shoulder to shoulder. You weren't invited, Tiffany hissed. Gloria popped a peppermint into her mouth and crunched down. I invited myself. Unlike you, I knock before I come stomping into someone's peace. Brian looked between them, confusion flaring into desperation. She can't just take our house? She's not taking anything, Gloria said. She's reclaiming what you drowned. Silence fell. Not because there was nothing left to say, but because everything had already been said. The air in the room thickened. Ruth could hear the faint ticking of the clock on the mantel again, the same one that had measured every long silence in her life. Finally, Brian bent to grab the notice from the floor, crumpling it further in his grip. "You think this ends here?" he said, voice low. "No," Ruth replied, "but I think this is where it begins." Brian stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable, wounded, angry, hollow. Then he turned and walked out. Tiffany followed, but not before muttering, "Old bitch," under her breath. Gloria raised an eyebrow. "Charming as always." The door slammed behind them. Ruth stood there, still as stone. Gloria reached out, gently placing a hand on her back. "You okay?" Ruth exhaled through her nose. That felt less like an ending and more like a breaking. "Sometimes," Gloria said, "you have to break a branch to let the roots breathe." They didn't speak for a while. The silence didn't stretch. It settled, heavy, real. Then Gloria asked, "What comes next?" Ruth turned toward her red ledger on the table. "I go watch it fall." The steps of the St. Louis County Courthouse felt harder than usual beneath Ruth's sensible flats. Pale stone, worn at the edges, the kind that had swallowed 1,000 footsteps, some hopeful, some defeated. This morning, hers were something else entirely. Final. Gloria walked beside her, dressed in a pressed navy windbreaker, her hair pulled back tight. She carried a thermos of coffee in one hand and a folded lawn chair in the other. "In case it goes long," she'd said, practical as ever. Ruth had opted for a soft gray blouse, her late husband's silver watch around her wrist. It didn't tell time anymore, but it gave her a pulse she could wear on the outside. A small crowd gathered on the steps, real estate agents in crisp suits, silent investors in fleece vests, two young men with phone apps open and brows furrowed. All of them had that buzz about them, the scent of opportunity, not remorse. Angela Reeves stood near the top step beneath the courthouse arch, clipboard in hand, blazer buttoned against the morning breeze. When she spotted Ruth, her whole face softened. "Well, look who finally decided to show her teeth," Angela said with a warm grin. She descended the steps and greeted Ruth with a hug, not stiff, not performative, familiar. "You ready?" she asked. Ruth looked up at the courthouse doors. "I've been ready since he told me to carry my own damn groceries." Gloria chuckled. "Then let's put this one in the ground." They didn't see Brian or Tiffany, not in the lot, not on the sidewalk, not hovering near the edges like shadows looking for leverage. Ruth had half expected them. She even thought she might feel something if they appeared, grief, anger, fear. But their absence felt louder than their presence ever had. Angela tapped her clipboard twice with her pen. "We're starting." The crowd hushed. Ruth and Gloria stepped back, folding into the line of silent observers. A pale sun cut through the cloud cover, casting thin shadows across the marble. Angela cleared her throat and launched into the list, addresses, case numbers, tax IDs. Ruth's pulse ticked higher with each one. Then there it was. Item 7, property known as 1434 Stonegate Lane, Chesterfield, 4-bedroom, 3-bath, assessed value $485,000. Bidding starts at $220. The numbers bounced off the stone like pebbles in a well. A young man raised his hand. $220? Another bidder. $240. $260? The bids came faster than Ruth expected, clean, aggressive, detached. In less than 2 minutes, it was over. "Sold," Angela called, slapping her clipboard. "To bidder number 12 at $310,000. Final." There was no applause, only scribbling. People moved on to the next parcel like it was weather. Angela stepped off the final stair and moved toward Ruth, clipboard still in hand. "That was fast," Ruth said, voice low. Angela leaned in, lowering her voice so only Ruth and Gloria could hear. "You're clear, Ruth. Debts settled. Credit line wiped. They're no longer tied to you." She paused, gave Ruth a long, knowing look. "And your name?" "It walks away spotless." Theirs doesn't. It landed like a second verdict. Gloria let out a low whistle. "I'd say I hope they didn't sleep through this, but I kind of do." Ruth didn't smile. She wasn't ready for that yet. Instead, she looked at the auction list, then out at the people still bidding, still buying, still trading stories and properties and futures like they were cards at a table. "You ever think," Ruth said slowly, "about how many of these are just people who trusted the wrong person?" Angela nodded. "Every damn day." Ruth looked up at the sky, clear now, unapologetically blue. "What now?" Gloria asked gently. Ruth didn't answer right away. Instead, she pulled a small folded sheet from her purse, the auction notice clipped from the paper, her handwriting circling the address in red ink. She stared at it one last time, then let it flutter to the ground. Angela caught it with her toe, pressing it into the step. Behind them, another property went on the block. The courthouse clerk's stamp landed with a dull thwack that seemed too quiet for what it meant. Ruth stood at the window of the records office, watching as the woman behind the glass ran a final copy through the machine, initialed it in blue ink, and fed it into a manila envelope without fanfare. "That's it," the clerk said. "Recorded, transferred, not yours anymore." Ruth nodded. It never really was. She took the envelope and walked out into the warm afternoon light. Gloria stood waiting by the planter box near the sidewalk, digging in her purse for a piece of gum. "Well?" she asked, shielding her eyes. Ruth lifted the envelope. Gloria clapped once, loud and satisfied, like a coffin sealed shut. They didn't linger. There was nothing left to witness. No celebratory photo, no parting shot. The house on Stonegate Lane had changed hands without ceremony, sold in the open air, stripped of memory, reduced to numbers and square footage. Ruth didn't feel triumphant. She felt clean. Back at home, the phone rang just as Ruth was peeling off her shoes. She answered without checking the caller ID. "Ruth, it's Martin." His voice was warm, efficient. "The deed's processed. County's already posted it. Foreclosure finalized. The buyers get their keys in 3 days." Ruth said nothing. Martin continued. "Brian and Tiffany? They're out. Legally. Physically. Financially. It's over." Ruth leaned against the wall, one socked foot still half in her shoe. "You're sure?" "Signed, sealed, delivered. I've seen less clean divorces." She gave a quiet laugh. Short, sharp. Martin added gently, "This will ripple for a while. Don't let the silence fool you." "I don't," she said. They hung up without goodbyes. Some conversations didn't need them. Later that evening, Ruth curled into her favorite chair, wrapped in her shawl, her red ledger resting on the side table like an old companion. A breeze moved the lace curtain, just enough to rustle the edges. She didn't reach for the ledger yet. She was waiting, knowing something was coming, some echo. It arrived at 8:43 p.m. Her phone lit up with a notification from Tiffany's public page. "Big changes coming. Sometimes life forces us to pivot. We're embracing simplicity, reprioritizing, and downsizing. It's not about what you lose, it's about what you gain in perspective. Fresh start, your gratitude." Ruth read it 3 times. Not a word about consequences, not a breath of accountability, just curated reinvention dressed up in hashtags. She didn't comment, she didn't share it. She simply took a screenshot, and then she opened the ledger. She added a new line. Chesterfield address. Sold. Eviction, reframed as enlightenment. She capped the pen, leaned back, and exhaled. Her bones ached a little less. The quiet around her didn't feel so heavy anymore. It felt earned. Across the room, the lamp cast a soft amber glow over her mantel, where a single framed photo remained. Her wedding day. Her husband in a navy suit, her in a dress she'd stitched by hand. The two of them smiling, back when everything felt upright. "I finally put it down," she whispered, as if he could still hear her. "The weight I wasn't meant to carry." No reply, of course. Just the steady hum of the refrigerator and the gentle creak of her old floorboards settling in for the night. Then came a knock at the door. 3 short raps. Not pounding. Not desperate, just there. Ruth stood slowly, cautious but curious, and made her way to the front. She opened it, and it wasn't Brian, it wasn't Tiffany. It was a young woman in her 20s with a clipboard in one hand and a nervous smile. "Sorry to bother you," the woman said. "I'm canvassing the neighborhood. There's a city hall meeting about rezoning, and we're hoping to get feedback from..." Ruth smiled. "Come in. I was just putting on a fresh pot." The morning had been unusually still. A soft breeze stirred the curtains, and sunlight fell across Ruth's kitchen floor in gentle rectangles. She moved with a quiet rhythm, wiping down the counter, snipping browned leaves from her spider plant, and rotating her potted orchids 1/4 turn toward the light. There was peace in the simple acts. Peace she had carved out and claimed for herself, inch by inch, over weeks of steady resolve. The knock at the door came just after 10. 3 measured taps, not frantic, not aggressive, almost hesitant. Ruth froze for a moment, then dried her hands and made her way to the front of the house. She opened the door. Brian stood on her porch. His clothes were rumpled and mismatched, a faded hoodie, dress shoes with worn soles, and khakis that looked slept in. His eyes were bloodshot, his posture deflated. In one hand, he clutched a reusable shopping bag slung over his shoulder like a suitcase. There was no sign of Tiffany. "Hey," he said softly, voice gravelly from lack of sleep or too many cigarettes. "Can I come in?" Ruth didn't answer immediately. She stepped outside, pulling the door closed behind her until only the screen separated them from the warmth of her home. Brian didn't wait for permission. "We've been staying at her sister's house," he said, gesturing vaguely. "In Wentzville. There's no room. We're on the couch. Dog's in the garage. It's been rough." Ruth said nothing. She studied his face carefully, not with cruelty, but with a kind of practiced detachment she had honed in recent weeks. Her silence stretched long enough that he looked away. "Tiffany's falling apart," he added, clearing his throat. "She's not herself. She cries every day, keeps talking about everything we lost. It's been a lot." "I'm sure it has," Ruth said calmly, folding her arms across her chest. "We just need a little time," Brian continued. "Just a place to land for a while. I'll help out around here, fix things, paint, yard work, whatever you need." Ruth let her eyes settle on the porch railing, where the paint had chipped slightly over the winter. She could have mentioned it. She could have offered him a brush and a bucket. Instead, she looked directly at him. "You told me to carry my own load," she said. Her voice wasn't cruel, but it held weight. "You looked me in the eye in that parking lot and told me to do it myself." "I wasn't thinking," Brian muttered. "That was a mistake. I didn't mean—" "But you did mean it," Ruth replied, cutting gently through his defense. "You meant it when it was convenient, when I was useful. You meant it every time you bought something on credit and left my name tied to the bill." He shifted uncomfortably, his mouth opening and closing like he wanted to argue, but couldn't find the words. "Carry your own load," she repeated, this time more softly. "Like you told me to." As if on cue, a familiar voice called out from the sidewalk. Gloria approached, holding a brown paper bag in one arm and a small basil plant in the other. Her sunglasses were perched low on her nose, and her stride was steady. "Well," she said, climbing the steps. "Didn't expect to see you here during daylight." Brian turned red. He looked like a man caught somewhere between shame and indignation. "I should go," he said, stepping backward toward the porch steps. "I think you should have gone a long time ago," Gloria replied, setting the plant on the porch rail with a smirk. "But better late than never." Brian didn't respond. He nodded once, more to himself than anyone else, then descended the stairs and walked toward a battered sedan parked at the curb. Ruth watched him go. He didn't turn around. Inside, the air felt cooler somehow, lighter. Gloria followed Ruth into the kitchen, handing her the plant. "For your windowsill," she said. "Thrives in sunlight, doesn't need much attention." Ruth smiled faintly and set it beside the aloe and the violets. She filled a glass with water and gently poured it into the soil. Then, without saying a word, she moved through the house, watering her plants one by one. Gloria sat at the table watching her, the rhythm of peace returning to the space. "Your houseplants," she said finally, "might be the only things in your life that actually appreciate what you give them." Ruth glanced back with a tired, dry smile. "They listen better." It was the kind of spring morning that didn't ask for attention, mild, unbothered, and perfectly ordinary. Downtown St. Louis buzzed around Ruth as she stepped off the Metrolink and walked toward Martin Heller's office, her leather satchel swinging gently at her side. She had dressed simply, in slacks and a soft blue cardigan. No jewelry, no makeup. But she wore her old bookkeeper's glasses, the ones with the gold trim. They made her feel precise. The sidewalks pulsed with movement, men in shirt sleeves rushing coffee to meetings, women with phones pressed to their ears, students with headphones and backpacks shuffling past. She didn't mind the motion. In fact, she welcomed it. She was no longer walking through life bracing for impact. Now she moved by choice. Martin's office was tucked into the third floor of a squat brick building just off Pine Street. When she arrived, the receptionist greeted her with a warm smile and led her back to the same room where she'd first signed the foreclosure paperwork. This time, though, the air felt different, no longer thick with consequence, but with intention. Martin stood to greet her, sleeves rolled and reading glasses perched low on his nose. "We ready?" Ruth nodded, and from behind her, Gloria entered with quiet confidence, a reusable shopping tote slung over her shoulder. She had insisted on coming along, not for moral support, she claimed, but to make sure no one tries to talk Ruth into anything foolish like naming a bench after herself. They all sat at the wide oak conference table, a stack of legal papers arranged in front of Ruth like a well-kept ledger. Martin turned each page with care, explaining them line by line, not out of obligation, but out of respect. Ruth followed along, eyes steady, fingers tracing each clause. "This trust," Martin said, tapping the centerpiece document, "will fund 5 scholarships per year for local students attending community college. Any major, no strings. Fully anonymous if you want it. Or named." Ruth considered this. "I'd like to keep my name off it," she said. "Let it be about what it gives, not who gave it." Martin nodded, scribbling a quick note. "And the transfer from your checking account and savings," he continued, "combined with the portion from your annuity, will guarantee the fund for at least 20 years. Ruth inhaled slowly, then signed the page. Her pen moved cleanly, no shake, no hesitation. She flipped to the next one and signed again, then again. By the time she reached the final document, her hand ached just slightly, but it didn't matter. Martin placed the last page in front of her. "This one makes it official. Once you sign, it's irrevocable." Ruth looked at Gloria. "Still time to change your mind," Gloria said, though her eyes already held pride. "You could always use the money to get a new water heater and a vintage Corvette." Ruth smiled. "I hate driving." With that, she signed the last page. Martin reached for the file, gave it a brief nod of approval, and began stacking the papers for his assistant to notarize. "It'll be finalized by end of business today," he said. "Congratulations. You just funded the futures of a few dozen strangers." "Not strangers," Ruth said quietly. "Just kids I haven't met yet." Gloria rose from her chair and crossed to Ruth without ceremony. She wrapped her arms around her, not too tight, not too tender, just right. "I'm proud of you," she said into Ruth's ear. "You turned ashes into seed." Ruth felt something shift inside her chest, warm and almost unbearable. Not sadness, not even relief, just a deep, undeniable rightness. When Gloria pulled back, Ruth noticed the corner of her own eyes had gone glassy. She didn't wipe them. She let the weight of it settle naturally. Martin closed his folder and stood. "You've done a good thing." "I've done a necessary thing," Ruth replied. They walked out into the hallway together, papers filed, past choices cemented, and no fanfare left to offer. But as they stepped out onto the sidewalk again, a breeze swept up from Market Street, warm and bright with the smell of lilacs from the nearby planters. Ruth paused, looking upward. Across the street, a group of high school students were filing into a city museum, laughing, nudging each other, holding notebooks and half-finished snacks. None of them looked at her. And she didn't need them to. The call came just after 7 on a Thursday evening. Ruth had just set down her fork, quiche, spinach, and mushroom, still warm, and reached for her water glass when the screen of her phone lit up across the room. Brian. The name hovered for a moment before the ringing stopped and his voicemail began, but it didn't stay silent for long. Less than 30 seconds later, the screen lit up again. This time she answered, not out of curiosity, not out of hope, just a final kind of firmness. She needed to hear what he had left in him to say. His voice exploded through the line before she could greet him. "You ruined me, do you understand that? You've ruined everything I built." In the background, Ruth could hear the distinct shrill of Tiffany's voice, distorted through the phone, full of tears or rage, maybe both. "They're threatening to garnish my wages," he shouted. "I don't even know if I'll have a job next month. Our credit's torched. We're sharing a room at her sister's place like teenagers." Ruth held the phone away from her ear slightly, not in anger or fear, but as one would gently remove their hand from a hot stove. She didn't interrupt. She didn't feed the flame. "We had plans," Brian continued. "We were going to refinance, flip the house. We were finally getting somewhere, and you just— What, you decided to teach me a lesson? At your age?" The static of his breath filled the line. Behind it, Tiffany's sobs surged louder for a moment, then faded as though a door had been shut. "I needed you," he said finally. The anger collapsed in on itself, hollow now. "You were supposed to be there." Ruth brought the phone back to her ear. Her voice, when it came, was quiet and final. "And I was, for longer than I should have been." She didn't wait for his response. She pressed the red button and ended the call. Her hand didn't shake as she set the phone face down on the table. She sat in the silence that followed, breathing in through her nose, out through her mouth. The air tasted different, lighter. A few minutes later, the doorbell rang. Gloria stepped in holding a bottle of red wine and a lopsided grin. "I figured you could use this." "You have impeccable timing," Ruth said, gesturing her toward the kitchen. "I saw the name on your caller ID through the window," Gloria replied, uncorking the wine with a practiced twist. It was either wine or a baseball bat. She poured 2 glasses and handed one over. "To pruning rotten branches," she said, raising her glass. "To clean soil," Ruth replied, and they clinked gently. Later that night, after Gloria had gone and the dishwasher hummed in the background, Ruth wandered into the living room. The light was soft, the room washed in amber from the lamp in the corner. Her eyes drifted toward the mantel, where a single thank you card now stood between 2 framed photographs, her wedding day on the left, and a photo of her small garden in full bloom on the right. The card had arrived that morning, hand-addressed from the Community College Foundation. Inside, written in tight, looping cursive, was a simple message. "To the donor who gave me my start, thank you for believing in students like me. I won't waste the chance." No signature, just the name of the scholarship fund and the year. Ruth had read it 3 times before tucking it into a small frame and placing it above the fireplace. Not for display, not for ego, just so it could catch the light when she passed by. She was adjusting it slightly, just a degree to the left, when her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Angela Reeves. "Angela, hey Ruth, the family who bought Stonegate just moved in, young couple with a toddler, good people. If you're up for it, thought you might want to meet them." Ruth stared at the message. Her first instinct was to say no. She'd buried enough of the past. Let the house stay gone. But something about the words young couple with a toddler caught her. They weren't just inheriting a house. They were starting a life in a place that had nearly buried her. She typed a slow reply. "Ruth, when?" Angela's answer came almost immediately. "Angela, Saturday morning, I'll be there, 10 a.m. Ruth didn't reply right away. She just looked up at the mantel again, at the space between what had been taken and what she'd given away freely. Then she nodded, quietly to herself. The streets of Chesterfield looked mostly unchanged. Quiet cul-de-sacs, mailboxes dressed in seasonal decals, lawns edged with crisp lines of mulch. Yet as Ruth turned the corner onto Stonegate Lane, her breath caught slightly, not from sorrow, but from a sense of strange detachment. She hadn't driven this way since the day of the auction, hadn't dared. But now she sat in Gloria's car, watching through the windshield as a life she'd once subsidized became someone else's mourning. "I can still turn around," Gloria said casually, though her hand stayed firm on the wheel. Ruth didn't answer right away. She simply tucked her cardigan tighter across her chest and looked straight ahead. "No," she said. "I need to see it clean." The house came into view slowly, as if easing into frame on purpose. The same brick exterior, the double garage, the front door painted a fresh navy blue. But the lawn was greener than she remembered. A wind chime swayed softly near the porch light, and in the driveway sat a silver Honda with a child's car seat visible through the rear window. As Gloria pulled to a stop across the street, Ruth spotted Angela Reeves already waiting by the curb. Her clipboard was gone, replaced with a coffee tumbler and sunglasses perched on her head. She waved them over, beaming. "Right on time." Ruth stepped out carefully, her knees stiff but her footing steady. The morning air was warm, edged with spring pollen and the faint scent of grass clippings. Across the driveway, the front door opened, and a young woman stepped out holding a toddler on one hip. "Angela!" she called. "They're here!" Angela walked alongside Ruth, her voice low and kind. "Their names are Danny and Marcus. Bought the place on a shoestring but came in with a solid plan. He's a firefighter. She's finishing nursing school. You'll like them." "I don't need to like them," Ruth replied softly. "I just need them to belong here." The toddler wriggled in his mother's arms, pointing excitedly toward a ceramic frog near the flower bed. Ruth smiled without meaning to. Danny, mid-20s, her curls pulled back in a scrunchie, and her eyes bright despite the strain of new parenting, stepped forward with a genuine kind of gratitude written all over her face. "You must be Ruth." "I am," Ruth said, reaching out her hand. Danny shook it firmly, Marcus soon joining beside her. He wore a station polo and jeans, one arm protectively around his wife's back. His posture spoke of long shifts and heavy things lifted in silence. "We just wanted to say thank you," Danny continued. "Angela told us you helped make everything move so smoothly with the auction paperwork. It meant a lot. We've had such bad luck with timing before." Ruth shook her head gently. "No thanks needed. Just take care of it. That home deserves hands that won't mistake it for a prize." Marcus nodded solemnly. "We know it's a fresh start. We don't take that lightly." From the porch, the toddler called out, "Froggy!" at the top of his lungs. Danny laughed. "He's named every rock in the flower bed already." They chatted a moment longer, easy and light, with Ruth asking polite questions and nodding with real interest. She didn't mention Brian or Tiffany. She didn't mention anything at all about how close the walls had come to swallowing her, or how she used to lie awake listening for debt to knock. That part of the story didn't belong to the house anymore. Eventually, Gloria stepped back to the curb and raised her phone. "Smile, Ruth," she called. "This one's for me, not for Facebook." Ruth turned, caught mid-laugh as Danny's toddler ran straight toward a dandelion and fell into the grass with a triumphant squeal. The shutter clicked. Angela crossed her arms with satisfaction. "You looked good, Happy." "I felt something," Ruth said, still watching the child roll in the grass. "Maybe that's close enough for today." They said their goodbyes. Danny offered to exchange numbers, in case we ever need someone who knows the quirks of this place, but Ruth declined kindly. "I think it's yours to learn now," she said. Back in Gloria's car, silence settled over them like a quilt. Not heavy, not awkward, just full. As Gloria turned the ignition, she glanced at Ruth and asked, "So, closure?" Ruth looked once more through the side mirror, where the new family now stood waving from the porch of a house no longer tethered to her. "No," she said, "not closure, continuation, just without me in it." And as they pulled away from Stonegate Lane, Ruth didn't look back. She didn't need to. The air inside Ruth's bungalow smelled like lemon oil and oregano. Not a cleaner's shine, but the warmth of habit, of wiping things down, of caring without rush. She stepped inside slowly, slipping out of her shoes and letting the door close behind her with a soft click. The quiet was complete, not empty. It was the kind that asked nothing of her. She set her purse on the hall table, hung her cardigan, and wandered into the kitchen. Afternoon light slanted through the lace curtains, tracing soft shadows across the tiled floor. Her houseplants were doing well. The basil reaching toward the window, the violets blooming again. On the counter sat a small envelope she'd left unopened before heading to Stonegate. No return address, just her name in tidy script. Ruth opened it gently, sliding the letter free. "Dear Donner, I've never met you, but I want you to know, Your scholarship changed everything. Next month, I start my first clinical rotation. I bought my own scrubs. They're cheap, but they're mine. You didn't just give money, you gave time. Thank you. A student who won't waste your faith. Ruth read it twice, then pressed the paper flat against the table, smoothing out the corners with careful fingers. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. Instead, she walked to the mantel, opened the same frame that held the first thank you note, and tucked this one behind it, layered like memory, like proof. A knock at the back door broke the moment. "Unlocked," she called out. Gloria stepped inside without waiting, mud on her boots and a basket balanced on one hip, filled with fat red tomatoes and a jar of pickled okra. Her braid had come partially undone, a loose curl swinging near her cheek. "Garden's finally waking up," she said. "Figured you might want the first batch before I pawn the rest off on the church ladies." Ruth grinned. "You bring enough for sandwiches?" "Always." They moved around the kitchen without fuss. Bread from Ruth's freezer, mayo from the back of the fridge, Ruth slicing the tomatoes thick and slow while Gloria fried a few pieces of bacon in the cast-iron skillet. The smell of it filled the room, settling deep into the air like they were seasoning the walls with comfort. "Did you go?" Gloria asked, nodding toward the frame on the mantel. Ruth nodded. "We met the new owners." "And?" "They'll be fine," Ruth said. "She's got nursing school eyes. He stands like he's used to running into burning buildings. The toddler named a rock Froggy. That house'll get loved." They sat down at the kitchen table, the one with the small scratch near Ruth's side, left by a dropped teacup 4 winters ago. She hadn't buffed it out. She liked her furniture honest. They ate slowly, between sips of iced tea and quiet conversation. The late-day sun melted across the countertops, washing everything gold. "I like it here," Gloria said suddenly. "Your kitchen, it's like it knows how to exhale." Ruth smiled without looking up. "So do I." They finished their sandwiches and cleaned up together, Gloria drying as Ruth rinsed. It was an old rhythm now. They didn't need to speak over it. When everything was put away, Ruth walked back to the living room and opened her red ledger one last time. The pages were nearly full. Dates, details, notations written in her even, looping hand. At the very bottom of the last page, beneath the final entry, she drew a single horizontal line across the paper. No more to track, nothing left to hold. She closed the book, placed it in the desk drawer, and slid it shut. Back in the kitchen, Gloria had returned to the table, legs crossed at the ankle, nursing a second glass of iced tea. "You know," she said, "I'll be telling this story long after we're gone." "Which one?" "The one where the woman didn't flinch, didn't fold, walked straight through the storm and came out cleaner than most." Ruth gave her a look. "That sounds a bit dramatic." Gloria raised her glass. "So survival." The room grew quiet again. The good kind. The kind that doesn't ache. Outside, the sky had begun to shift, blush streaks of sunset threading the clouds, the kind of light that made everything look earned. Ruth leaned back in her chair, her eyes landing on the plants in the windowsill, now touched with orange. Her hands rested on the table, steady, unburdened. She didn't speak for a long time. She didn't need to. But when she finally did, her voice came low and sure, her gaze still out the window. "He wouldn't carry my bags, so I carried his mortgage straight to the auction block."